In this video, we're going to explore Dudley Castle as a medieval defensive site. The way I suggest you use this video is that the first time you watch it with the sound on, then you replay it with the sound muted and a sheet of paper for you to write down the sorts of things that you remember me saying. Then replay it and actually check, did you remember lots of the points that I made? Add in the stuff that's missing. And then do that once a week until you're really confident that you can recall lots of the different names and features of the castle and parts of its history. Then when you can do that, do it once a fortnight and then finally once a month. So you build up an idea about the castle and its use as a medieval defensive site. When we went to Dudley Castle, in the visitor centre we saw these 4 busts of individuals that Dudley Zoo thinks are significant in building the castle that we see today. And this video is going to focus on the second of those, and that is Roger de Summery II. Sorry for repeating second. The man who built lots of the defensive structures that we see now. Before we get on to the remains, let's quickly understand how de Summery and his relatives got control of the castle in the first place. And the person on the left, Ansculf, was the man who built the wooden Motte and Bailey castle that we looked at in the last video. When Ansculf died, his son William Fitz-Ansculf, which literally translates as William the son of Ansculf, inherited his lands and Dudley Castle. And William Fitz-Ansculf, that's Ansculf's son, goes off on crusade. He leaves England and travels to the Middle East, to modern day Israel and Jordan, that area around Egypt and sort of those areas, where he's part of a Christian army fighting Muslims for control of this area known as the Holy Lands. So if you want to understand attitudes towards religion at the time, the fact that William Fitz-Ansculf goes there is quite good at understanding that. He dies on crusade, probably without having a son or maybe even a daughter. And so the King of England at the time gives the castle and the lands to another one of his lords, the family called the Paganels or the de Paganels. And the de Paganel family become the lords of Dudley Castle and they own it. The de Paganel family then, we think, actually rebuild parts of the castle in stone. And the reason why we think this is that Dudley Castle is connected to a national event called the Anarchy. This is when the King of England died without having a son. And so the King of England made, before he died, all of the barons and lords in England swear allegiance to his daughter Matilda. When he died, a number of those barons and lords decided that actually they were going to support not Matilda to be the queen, but a more distant relative called Stephen. And the Anarchy is a civil war between the supporters of Matilda and Stephen over who should be the ruler of England. And Dudley fits into this national event because the de Paganel family support Matilda against Stephen. And we know from a chronicle, so that's a written record, a chronicle written by a monk called John, who was at Worcester Abbey, so a chronicle written by John of Worcester. He records that Stephen brought his army to Dudley to lay siege, so that is to attack the de Paganel castle at Dudley. He fails, and then he lays waste to the local town and takes livestock and animals with him and kills others. And actually, archaeologists in Dudley Town Centre, when buildings have been demolished and they've been building new things in the 1960s and other periods of time, have found evidence that probably supports that, because there are very few remains of Dudley from before the Anarchy, and there's evidence of possible burning, and there's evidence of possible killing of animals, and so therefore that supports John of Worcester's idea. So Dudley actually is attacked, it's besieged, so that means there's a siege, an attack made of it for the first time in this event called the Anarchy. So it's tied into a national event, and this event is really good if you want to show attitudes at the time towards women, the idea that people thought that women shouldn't be rulers of a country. Now, why this is also important is that Stephen was not successful in his siege, yet he was successful in other sieges locally where he attacked and took control of wooden Motte Bailey castles. And so historians think it is possible that the reason why he was unsuccessful at Dudley at taking de Paganel's castle there is that it was either completely or partially rebuilt in stone. And so you can see how Dudley fits into national. Sorry. Later, the de Paganels join a rebellion against a king of England, Henry II. And this rebellion is led by his sons against their father because they want to have land rule. They may even want him to actually step aside as king and let one or more of them rule his lands in England and France. And some of the barons of England joined the sons against the king. One of these barons is a member of the de Paganel family who owns Dudley Castle. Anyway, Henry II wins this revolt, or crushes the revolt, wins, defeating his children, and Dudley has its defences destroyed. It's actually quite representative because 20 other castles also have their defences destroyed because they've supported the sons of King Henry II against the father in the rebellion. The de Paganel family do not rebuild, and there's archaeological evidence that suggests that the site at Dudley isn't used either for fortification or possibly even residence for around 90 years. The de Paganel family have other houses that they can use and other residences, and then the last of the male de Paganels dies without any children. And the castle and the lands, or the ruins of the castle, because that's all they are, the ruins of the castle and the lands are then given to the husband of the last de Paganel's sister, because it's seen that the sister, being a woman, isn't capable to inherit. So that gives you an idea about the attitudes towards women at the time. And so it's given to her husband, a man whose surname is de Summery. And that is how the de Summerys inherit Dudley Castle, through the fact that the first of the male de Summerys to own the castle was married to the sister of the last of the de Paganels. And so that's how the de Summerys, who build lots of the defensive structures that we see today, end up inheriting the castle. To begin with, the de Summery family has no need to rebuild the ruins that are at Dudley. They run the land around the castle and the estate, but live in South Wales in their castle at Dinas, which is just outside Cardiff. Yet a national event ends up actually forcing them to rebuild Dudley, and that national event is the Second Barons' War. This is another civil war, but this time it's between supporters of the king against a group of barons who want to put limits on the king's power. They want to actually restrict the king from being able to do whatever he wants and think that the barons should have a say in how the country's run. To begin with, Roger de Sumery II is a supporter of the rebel barons until the war actually starts. And then, like other barons, he actually ends up supporting the king. Roger de Sumery realises that he needs to have another fortification in the Midlands when supporters of the rebel barons, including the Prince of North Wales, start to attack South Wales and start to take land and putting Dudley Castle under threat. And so Roger de Sumery begins work on rebuilding Dudley Castle. He does so, however, without the permission of the king. And we know this because the king at the time, King Henry III, issues an order for him to stop the building work until he gets permission. He gets permission from the king, and we know this because the documents in London at the National Archives, these documents on the screen are called patent rolls. And these patent rolls include copies of all of the orders that the king had written and sent out. And one of those is a license to crenellate, that is permission to build a castle. It's called a license to crenellate. Crenellations, by the way, are the uppy-downy bits on the top of castles. And this license gives Roger de Sumery II permission to build a castle not only at Dudley, but also at Wheeley. The reason why he wants to fortify the manor house that's at Wheeley and turn it into a castle and rebuild the defences at Dudley is because not only is Dinas under threat, but also by this point of the Second Barons' War, there's a chance that the armies of the rebel barons and the Prince of North Wales are going to come into England, and actually the lands in Dudley are under threat. And so Roger de Sumery gets permission from the king to rebuild this castle. And on the same day, there's another castle that the king gives permission to rebuild, and that's down in Sussex. And so therefore it is fairly representative. And that's why Dudley, which has been abandoned for 90 years, is rebuilt. It's because of this national event, the Second Barons' War. But it also gives you an idea about the defensive reason for Dudley being built. That Dudley is being built as a defensive structure against attack. Yet it takes over 50 years for the castle to be finished, and it actually isn't finished by the time that Roger de Sumery II dies. Yet primarily this castle was begun as a defensive structure. Now we understand a little bit about what the castle tells us about attitudes towards women, attitudes of Christians towards people from other religions, and also how the castle ties into national events. Let's look at what this castle may have looked like that Roger de Sumery II started to rebuild. On the screen you can see a quick screenshot I've taken from Google Earth that shows the castle today. And on there I've put that beige dotted line to show where there may, and I'm saying the word here may, have been outer defences. So you've got the castle that it is today, and then that beige line is where there may have been defences built by Roger de Sumery II. And then the blue is where there may have been an outer ditch or an outer moat. Now I'm saying the word may because evidence of all of these isn't there. And that's because they've been destroyed either by later castle building works or significantly damaged by the limestone mines, or they've been damaged in the landscaping when turning the castle into pleasure gardens, or when the zoo has been built. I'm going to quickly walk you through some of them now that you may, well, some of the things you may be able to say might have existed. The first is the outer gatehouse, and there is an outer gatehouse there now. These pictures were taken when we went there, and you can see that there's a big stone structure there, and that's Tudor. There may have been a gatehouse, an outer gatehouse built by Roger de Summery that's underneath that, probably likely it was. But this one is Tudor that's built there. Also, if you wanted to, you could point out where the walls may have been. Now, to begin with, if you walk from the gatehouse, you can actually go past the estate manager's cottage, where there is a little bit of wall. And then after that, the wall doesn't exist. But there is a line that you can see that the path and the ground seems to form a plateau. And that's a sort of level bit on the side of the hill. And the zoo very much follows this as two levels on the side of the hill. You've got this idea that where there might have been an extra layer of defences, and you can walk around that. For example, here's a picture on the screen that I've taken from Google Earth around some of the animal enclosures. You can actually see where there's a level aspect and then there's a steep bit at another level, but that might be where the outer defences may have been. That might have caused that. Or it could have been the building of the carriage drive in the 19th century, or it could have been landscaping of the gardens, or it could have been mine working, or it could have even been the English Civil War. That's the problem. There's been so much activity that the outer defences are very difficult to see. It's guesswork. In particular, the northern end of the site, we have no real idea about what that would have looked like. On the original image I put on the dotted line, a triangle, and that's because that's what's there now. There's a large triangular promontory that juts out, sorry, and that's actually built in the English Civil War as a gun bastion. Cannons are put on it in the English Civil War to defend the castle from attack. But they did this by actually putting soil on top and destroying what was already there to build this triangular gun bastion. And then to cap it all off, when the Tectons were building their structures for the zoo in the 1930s, they chose this triangular promontory for what was the ballroom and now is used as the restaurant, that actually we have no idea about understanding what that might have looked like at the time if there is a huge if Roger de Summery had outer defences there. The Inner Bailey, or the castle as we know now, well, it's far easier to show visitors what that looked like. And so on the left is a map that uses colours to show the different phases of building remains that are on the site. And the dark green is the building remains from the time that the de Summerys, in particular Roger de Summery, and then his successors, owned the castle. And on the right, but just slightly at a different angle, is a Google Earth screenshot I've taken so you can see the two. So, for example, if you just very quickly just look at the picture, you can see that we can show people the gatehouse. Lots of that is from the de Summery period. The keep is completely from the de Summery period. The wall that goes from the keep up towards the north gate, that's from the de Summery period. It is worth pointing out that the chimney breasts that are in it, the holes for roof and floor joists, we'd have to tell visitors that wouldn't have been there, that those were actually put in by John Dudley during the Tudor period. Then we come to the north gate. From the north gate, really round to the Great Chamber block, all the remains of Roger de Summery's castle were destroyed when John Dudley built his castle. And so that we don't know what was there. There may have been, and there probably was, other buildings, such as a great hall was probably there, accommodation for servants, kitchens, lots of buildings. They're called ancillary buildings, so supporting buildings where people worked. Those have all gone. Then you've got the Great Chamber block, most of which was built by Roger de Summery, and then you've got the wall that comes back round to the gateway. That was reused from the demolished stone castle, so that remains the time of Roger de Summery. let's go through a look at each of these a little more detail. And we'll start with the gateway. Now, the photo on the screen shows the gateway close up, but it doesn't show the barbican, because the barbican, the remainder 2 round towers, were added later onto Roger de Summery's gateway. And what you can see is the gateway looking from the outside up in towards the castle. This is from Google Earth, which is why there's a cyclist helmet there. If you look at the shot on the screen now, which is also from Google Earth, you can point out to visitors, look at the thickness of the walls. These walls are defensive. They are very large. Ignore the arch, the far arch you can see, because that's in the barbican. Originally that wouldn't have been there. This would have been the outer defensive wall. And you can notice that you can see that there's a slot that goes up the sides of the wall and then to a long slit across the top of the arch. And that would have been for a portcullis, a sliding frame, probably of wood, that was used as a defensive gate. Because there's no hinges in it and locks, it's very hard to actually break through. You can then also point out, you can just probably see in the picture, there are the remains in the brickwork for the supports and locking mechanism for a large set of doors or gates. Then if you actually turn around in the gateway and look up, there's a hole in the ceiling that's now been blocked up, and that is a murder hole, and that would be used to drop things like rocks or possibly even have archers from the room above firing things down. So if they get through the portcullis and the first set of doors, that actually they're there and they are then attacked by people above them, because this is about defence. It's filled in when the castle is no longer needed as a defensive structure, because then you can use that room above as accommodation, whereas if it's got a great big hole in it going down below, it's going to get quite drafty. The picture on the screen is the one that we've seen before, which is from the gateway looking from outside in through the double gateway towards the bailey. The walls that form the 2 sides of the gateway as you go through from the first arch to the second set of arches, those walls are 2 of the original walls from the original stone castle. And that gives you the idea that the gateway was demolished by Henry II to mean that actually it was no longer defensible. And so all that's left are the 2 internal walls, because you can't really defend those. And they're reused by Roger de Summery. At the far end of the gateway, you've got another set of signs in the stonework of another gate or set of doors. And then, as you see on the screen, if you look up, you can see once again there's a slit in the archway for another portcullis. And so therefore you can actually clearly show to a visitor, look at the thickness of these walls. You've actually got a series of defences that mean that this gateway isn't built for show, it is built for defence. And then if you actually walk into the bailey and turn around and look back at the gatehouse, which you can see here, you'll notice that there's a doorway on the left-hand side halfway up, and that would have been, we think, for a retractable ladder, a wooden ladder that they can pull up, so that if the castle is attacked and if they actually get through the gateway and into the bailey, they can pull that ladder up and then actually defend the gateway until rescue can arrive. So this is a defensive structure. It's a common feature from castles built at the time in Wales. This is a castle that's built for defence. Now the structures on the right of the gateway that you can see, that's the stable block. That's built after the castle is no longer used for defence, but after the English Civil War. And so that you have to ignore. Then, if we move round towards the keep, this is really where you can show what de Summery's castle would have looked like. And the first thing that's worth pointing out is that the motte is a Norman motte that was reused but lowered. It was lowered to take the massive stone keep that Roger de Summery built. And what you see today is a partial reconstruction of De Summary's keep. On the left is what an archaeologist thinks the keep probably would have looked like. On the right is a photograph that we took when we went to Dudley Castle of what the keep looks like today. However, even that is a reconstruction, because in the 19th century, when Dudley's turned into pleasure gardens, the Earl of Dudley gets some of his servants to actually rebuild part of the keep using stones that are left from the demolition rubble from the Civil War. So they actually put original stones back how they think it might have gone to rebuild the two northern towers to their current height. The southern towers are then levelled so that the two Crimean War guns can be put on. So it makes it possibly hard for us to work out what the keep might have looked like in De Summary's time, because we don't know how right the Earl of Dudley's men got it when they rebuilt the stone. But if you look at the castle from the outside, you can see that once again it is for defence. Look at the windows. They are quite small. They're designed to make it hard to fire arrows in. You've got the crenellations at the top. This is a defensive structure. You can see that when you actually, once you walk up the bailey to get to the keep, you can see that when you actually come to the keep, because if you look up on the keep, there is another slit for a portcullis. So the keep is also designed to be defensive. So if people get through the gateway and into the bailey, then actually there's another layer of defence. Furthermore, if you look at the wall that sits behind the portcullis slip, it's another huge, thick, defensive wall. It's designed not to be easily broken through. And in there is a recess. You can actually get your arm, as long as your arm's not too fat, you can actually stick your arm, your forearm into this, and it goes a long way back, and that would have been for a wooden beam to slide across to keep the doors or the gates shut behind the portcullis if there was an attack. And it is really solidly built, because this castle, this keep that's built by Roger de Summary, is designed to be a defensive structure. Now, before you go up the stairs, have a quick look at the fence that's at the end of the entranceway, and that gives you a view of the ground floor of the keep that remains. You'll see that opposite you, the walls aren't very high, they're almost the same height. Remember, that was taken down and levelled off by the Earl of Dudley's men to put those two cannons there. And it makes it really hard to work out what actually the keep might have looked like. However, if you look straight opposite you, you'll notice on the far wall there's a small platform, and that possibly would have been for an oven, an open fireplace, because it's thought that this was originally the kitchens and service area for the keep. And when you get up the top, you'll actually be able to see that a little more clearly. So if you take the visitors up the spiral staircase, pointing out that this is a spiral staircase, they are built for defence. Because actually, if you're right-handed, as most people are, and you've got a sword, if you are actually attacking up the staircase, it's very hard for you to swing it at a defender if you're coming up the staircase. But if you're a defender coming down, it's really hard to swing it at them. Sorry, really easy to swing it at them, because this was originally built for defence. If you look at the staircase that's in the Sharrington range, not so much the Vice Tower, but the other staircase, they're a big, grand, wide staircase. They're not about defence. But this is, it's small, it's inconvenient, it is about defence. As you walk up it, point out to them the windows. They're narrow. Once again, these are arrow slits that are designed to be able to fire arrows out and to let light in, but without the risk of arrows easily coming in from outside if the castle was under attack. As you walk up De Summary's tower, you'll notice that you get part of the way up, and then the staircase changes. Now, archaeologists can't agree why. Some think it's because it was originally built like that. Others think that actually what happened is that when basically where you get up to and it stops, everything above that is from the Earl of Dudley's reconstruction, when they put original stones in but not actually in the right place, which is why it goes the wrong way after that. But it's we don't know for sure, but it's a nice way to point out to visitors, well, hang on, wait a minute, there's something not right here. Now, this could be original or it could be the reconstruction. Don't take everything that you see with this keep at first glance. Then when you get up to the top, you can point out the view that you can see towards Wales, which, of course, remember, this is why the castle was built. That is where the border area with Wales is where there's trouble coming from, the Second Barons' War. This castle is about defending Roger de Summery's lands from attack. The aerial shot at the moment, which I've taken once again from Google Earth and zoomed in, which is why it's a little bit grainy, I apologise, allows you to see the interior of the keep. And you can point out some of these features from the top looking down, but it's very hard to see. This view is very difficult unless you've actually got a drone to be able to look at it. And what you can see is that the ground floor is quite plain. There's not really any windows. Partially that's because you don't want people to be able to attack. But also it's because this is the area that we think was the kitchens and the storerooms for the castle. Then you've got those big windows on the inside, they're fairly small on the outside, on the first floor. And this is where historians and archaeologists think there was likely a great hall. I'm saying a great hall because it's highly likely there was another great hall out in the Bailey which has been destroyed by John Dudley's buildings, and that this is where there would have been rooms, probably for the Constable of the Tower who ran the castle on behalf of Roger de Summery, and there would have also been rooms for visitors, and then the roof, because it's thought that probably there was only really two major floors in the main rectangular part, or it's a square, it's not, it's actually rectangular part of the castle. And you can see that by actually looking at the windows that are there. Then you'll notice that there are indents, square indents for roof joists to hold the roof of the main part of the castle, and then the towers look as though they were one floor higher, and those rooms were probably for servants to sleep in, or possibly visitors to sleep. And then there's the wall walk that you can see from the top as well, which is where guards would have been able to walk around the outside to monitor the view. You've got the crenellations that they can hide behind whilst they're loading an arrow, and they can come out, fire their arrow back, and then hide back behind the protection of the wall. And so the keep is a very good structure if you want to show Roger de Summery's castle, what it probably would have looked like, and how it is defensive. But there are, of course, the problems that it was demolished, well, changed first of all by John de Sutton internally, and probably John Dudley, that it was then partially demolished in the English Civil War, and then partially rebuilt in the 19th century. And so those things have had an impact on how much we can actually see of the castle. Now, the other major part of Roger de Summery's castle that exists is the Great Chamber and Chapel block. And on the left is a photograph of what it looks like today. And on the right is an artist's reconstruction of what that area probably would have looked like in the time of Roger de Summery. Now, on the left-hand side of the reconstruction, they've also imagined that this is where they think the Great Hall would have been. There is no evidence for that in the ground because, of course, it has been damaged, well, built over, stone reused, stone taken out by John Dudley's buildings. So that's what the left-hand building with the steps that go up and the four windows. Then you'll notice there is the next building that's got four small windows and one large one. That is the Great Chamber and Chapel block. On the left, in the photograph, you'll notice that you've got the big window of the chapel, but then you've got these two square windows in the Great Chamber block. And that is because in the time of John Dudley, the original Great Chamber block of Roger de Summery, the windows replaced with large Tudor ones because this was no longer there's no longer needed for defence, because the idea is that The Great Chamber Block is not primarily for defence. It is a residence, it is entertainment, it is in comfort, but if necessary, you can then evacuate to the keep, but the windows are still fairly small. In John Dudley's castle, the mansion, the windows are very big. In this Great Chamber Block on the left, there would have been the rooms that Roger de Summery and his close family would have used. They would have lived there with servants to help them dress, to help them wash. They would have had their food served to them. Their food would have been cooked either in the kitchen in the keep or in another kitchen block next to the Great Hall. And that food would have been cooked by the cook who ran the kitchen, who was an important servant. They would have had their own servants to look after them. And it would have been prepared by other cooks. And then you would have had people who would have done the washing up. You would have had people who actually spit boys, who are the lowest people in the castle. And their job was to wake up and stand by the fire all day, turning the spit that's got the meat on it. And so when you're actually in the keep, you can really paint an idea about there would have been a big long metal bar with whole joints of meat on it, whole animals, slowly being turned by this child whose job it was to roast the meat, and they would have got paid virtually nothing. They would have actually slept either in the kitchen or on the floor of the Great Hall. But the Great Chamber Block is a place of luxury. There was chimneys, there was individual rooms. It is a place of relative comfort. Next to that, you've then got the chapel. And you can see the big window of the chapel there. That would have had stained glass in it. On the side, if you look at the reconstructed drawing, on the side you'll notice there's an ogee arch, O-G-E-E, an ogee arch, which would have been how you would have got into the chapel. And this is a really fine piece of stonework. This is actually a real statement about how important religion is to the de Summerys and people at the time, that the finest bit of stonework in the castle they've actually put on the chapel. You'll also notice in the reconstruction, there is a small wooden building. That small wooden building would have been where guards would have actually stayed. They possibly would have slept there. It's a guardhouse. The evidence for that is archaeologists found the remains of wooden posts when they dug this area, and they think that's probably where the guardhouse was. And those guards would have, and we're only talking a few, probably sort of like 8 to 12 guards, and these are not knights on horseback. These are poorly paid, possibly not even paid at all, men who would spend their days on the battlements, keeping a watch out, manning the gatehouse, going around doing other jobs. They would have probably slept in that room. That actually their life was not that comfortable, not as bad as the spit boys. They would have stopped there. And you'll notice also in the picture on the gatehouse is this retractable wooden ladder. And so the chapel and Great Chamber Block, the chapel, by the way, before we move on, is where the chaplain in the castle would have actually ended up living. He would have had his own servants as well. The chapel and the Great Chamber Block is the last of the big structures that's left from Roger de Summery's castle. So if we go back to the image for the moment of the castle today and the plan of the castle, you can see that large parts of the defensive structures with thick walls, small windows, portcullises, that was built by Roger de Summery and his ancestors because of defence, because their need was about actually protecting themselves, because it's driven by this national event, the Second Barons' War. The final thing that I should have mentioned is in the towers of the keep, you've got the four corner towers. The northwest tower, so that's the one that's actually, of the two today, the tallest. In that, there's evidence that there was a guard robe built in Roger de Summery's time, and actually there's a chute that was archaeologists found was dug through the motte and into the moat outside. And the other thing that's worth pointing out, there would originally have been a ditch that went around the whole of the motte, including inside the bailey. so that if the bailey fell, you could still defend the motte against attackers from the keep. So that gives you a really good detailed idea of the features of the castle that are there today from the time of Roger de